At 10:17 that night, my foreman called me and said 6 words that made my stomach turn. "Your daughter-in-law is breaking in." I was sitting at my kitchen table when the phone rang. Outside, rain tapped against the windows, and the house was quiet except for the old wall clock above the sink. I answered. "Eli?" My foreman Ray barely whispered. "She's at the North Warehouse. She brought a locksmith. There's another man with her." I looked across the room at the photograph of my late wife Margaret. For 3 months, I had been waiting for this exact phone call. And now that it had finally come, I felt something strange. Not fear. Relief. "Don't stop her," I said. Ray went silent. "What?" "Let her open the door." "Eli, are you sure?" I stood slowly, my knees aching the way they always did after a long day at the Marina. "Yes." Then I added quietly, "She has no idea what she's about to find. My name is Harold Mercer. I'm 67 years old, and for more than 40 years, I repaired fishing boats, salvaged damaged engines, and built Mercer Marine from practically nothing. People who meet me today see an old man with gray hair, rough hands, and a bad knee. They assume I'm harmless. That assumption has protected me more times than I can count. My son Caleb never saw that side of me. He was 35, kind-hearted, trusting, and far too willing to believe that everyone had good intentions. That was exactly what worried me about his wife, Brianna. She had entered our family 2 years earlier. She called herself a lifestyle consultant. She had expensive clothes, polished photographs, and thousands of followers online. But there was something about her that bothered me from the beginning. She didn't look at people the way most people did. She looked at what they owned. The first time I realized it, we were celebrating Caleb's birthday at a restaurant near the Marina. Brianna casually asked, "Harold, what's inside that old building on the north side of your property?" My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I had never told her about that building. Not once. It was an ugly, weather-beaten structure surrounded by rusted fencing. Most people barely noticed it. I smiled. "Old equipment." She smiled back. "That's all. That's all." But her eyes stayed on me. Then she asked, "Have you ever considered selling the land?" That night, I barely slept. Because I knew something she didn't. The building wasn't empty. And whatever was inside it was worth far more than the land itself. The next morning, Brianna arrived at my house with Caleb and a leather folder. She spread documents across my kitchen table. Property estimates, tax records, development projections, a red circle around the North Warehouse. "Dad," Caleb said, smiling, "Brianna thinks this could change everything for you." I looked at my son. He looked proud of her. That hurt more than I expected. I slowly turned another page. Then I noticed something. She had researched the property, but she hadn't discovered the one thing that mattered. I closed the folder. "I'll think about it." Brianna's smile remained, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. That was when I knew. She wasn't asking. She was planning. And 3 months later, while she stood outside my locked warehouse with a locksmith and a truck, she was finally about to discover why I had never tried to sell that building. But before I tell you what happened when that door opened, you need to know what Brianna had already done to my son. Because the warehouse wasn't her first target. Caleb was. And I was about to discover just how far she was willing to go to get what she wanted. The first warning didn't come from Brianna. It came from my son's business account. A few weeks after she began asking questions about the warehouse, Caleb stopped by my workshop looking exhausted. "Dad, can I borrow some money?" I wiped the grease from my hands. "How much?" He hesitated. "Just enough to cover a payment." I studied his face. Caleb had never been good at asking for help. When he was a boy, he'd rather go hungry than admit he couldn't afford lunch. So I knew something was wrong. "Which payment?" He looked away. "The shop van." My heart sank. Caleb owned a small bait and tackle store beside the Marina. He had built it himself after saving for years. That little shop wasn't just a business. It was the one thing that made him feel like he had become his own man. "Why is the payment late?" I asked. "It shouldn't be." "Then why is it?" He rubbed his forehead. "Brianna handles the account. She said the bank had some issue with the automatic payment." A simple explanation. Too simple. I offered him the money, but before he could take it, Brianna called. Caleb answered. Within seconds, his expression changed. "Wait, what?" He listened. Then he looked at me. "They fixed it." I nodded. But something inside me had already started moving. That evening I called Ray. Pulled the business records. Looking for something specific? Anything unusual? 2 days later, Ray brought me the first piece of the puzzle. There were dozens of withdrawals. Small amounts. $100 here. $200 there. $300 somewhere else. Nothing large enough to immediately attract attention. But together, they formed a pattern. The money wasn't going toward Caleb's store. It was disappearing. And every transaction had been approved through the account Brianna controlled. I stared at the numbers for a long time. My son wasn't just struggling. Someone was quietly bleeding his business dry. Still, I didn't confront her. Because I had learned something during 40 years of dealing with people. When you accuse a liar too early, you don't get the truth. You get a better lie. So I waited. A week later, Brianna showed up at my house with Caleb. She looked completely different from the woman I'd seen at the restaurant. She was nervous. "Harold," she said, "we've been thinking about something." I poured coffee. "What?" She exchanged a glance with Caleb. Then she said, "Maybe Caleb should sell the shop." I nearly dropped the cup. "Why?" "It isn't profitable enough." Caleb nodded reluctantly. "She's been helping me look at the numbers." I looked at my son, then at Brianna. "Interesting." Brianna leaned forward. "We could use the money to start something bigger." "What kind of something?" She smiled. "Something that doesn't require you to work 12 hours a day." Her answer sounded reasonable. But I knew what she wasn't saying. She needed money. Fast. And my son's shop was the easiest thing she could reach. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to expose her. Not yet. Instead, I was going to give her something to chase. Something valuable enough to make her desperate. Something she would believe could solve every problem she had. The following morning, I called Ray. "I need you to prepare a file." "What should it say?" I looked through the window toward the old warehouse. "Make it look like there's something inside that building worth a fortune." Ray was silent. "You're baiting her." "No," I said. "I'm giving her exactly what she thinks she wants." 3 nights later, I placed the file in my study. Not hidden. Not protected. Just visible enough for the wrong person to notice. And that night, I heard footsteps downstairs. Slow. Careful. Then the unmistakable sound of my study door opening. I stayed perfectly still in bed, because I already knew who was walking through my house. And when the footsteps stopped outside my study, I heard a whisper that made my blood run cold. "Please let this be real." Brianna had taken the bait, but she still hadn't realized the bait was watching her. And the next thing she did would prove that this wasn't simply about money anymore. It was about what she was willing to destroy to get it. I didn't turn on the hallway light. I wanted Brianna to believe she was alone. From my bedroom doorway, I watched her move through the darkness toward my study. She was wearing socks, carrying a tiny flashlight, and moving with the kind of caution people use when they already know they're doing something wrong. She stopped at my desk. Then she opened the drawer. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. This wasn't curiosity anymore. She was searching my home, searching for something she believed belonged to her. I waited until she pulled out the property folder. Then I switched on the light. Brianna nearly screamed. She spun around, clutching the folder against her chest. "Harold!" I leaned against the doorway. "What are you doing?" For half a second, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Then the mask returned. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered. Apparently. She looked toward the hallway. I was looking for something to read. I glanced at the folder in her hands. "You found an interesting book." Her face tightened. "I thought this was information about the Marina." "It is." She slowly put it back. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have touched it." I nodded. "No, you shouldn't have." She walked upstairs. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close. Then I went into my study and checked the drawer. The folder was exactly where I'd left it, but one document was missing. That told me everything. The next morning, I called a man named Owen Pierce. Owen had worked as a private investigator for years. I had only used him twice before, but both times he'd found things other people couldn't. I slid a photograph of Brianna across the diner table. I need to know where her money is going. 3 days later, Owen returned with a thick envelope. He didn't even sit down before saying, "You're going to want to hear this somewhere private." I stared at him. "How bad?" "Worse than you think." He opened the envelope. Brianna's online business looked successful. It wasn't. She had barely any legitimate clients. Her expensive lifestyle was being funded by borrowed money, hidden withdrawals, and credit accounts that were almost completely exhausted. Then Owen placed another page in front of me. She lost a large amount in an online investment scam. How much? Enough to put her in serious trouble. I swallowed. And the debt? Owen looked at me. She owes a private lender. That sentence told me everything. What kind of lender? The kind you don't want your family meeting. My hands tightened around my coffee cup. Then Owen showed me the part that hurt the most. Brianna hadn't just been borrowing money. She had been taking money from Caleb's business. Month after month. Small transfers. Fake expenses. Payments disguised as advertising and supplies. She had been stealing from my son while smiling at him across the dinner table. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I thought about telling Caleb immediately. But then I imagined what would happen. He would confront her. She would cry. She would explain. She would promise. And because Caleb loved her, he'd probably believe her. So I asked Owen one question. Can you prove it? He nodded. Every transfer. Then don't show it to anyone yet. Owen looked confused. What are you planning? I looked through the diner window toward the Marina. I'm going to let her make one mistake she can't explain away. That afternoon I called Ray. I want a new inventory sheet. What kind? Something that looks valuable. He frowned. How valuable? I gave him a number large enough to make a desperate person reckless. We created a fictional inventory of specialized marine equipment supposedly stored inside the North warehouse. The paperwork looked authentic. Old purchase dates, serial numbers, estimated resale values, a confidential stamp across the top. Then I placed the file where Brianna could find it. I didn't have to wait long. That night, she went into my study again. This time, I watched from a hidden camera. She found the file. Her hands began shaking. She photographed every page with her phone. Then she smiled. Not the polite smile she showed Caleb. Not the perfect smile she used online. This was different. It was the smile of someone who believed she had finally found her escape. She left the room. 10 minutes later, she made a phone call. I couldn't hear the other person clearly. But I heard Brianna say, I found it. Then she paused. No, I'm serious. Another pause. Her voice dropped. There is enough there to erase everything I owe. I sat frozen in my chair. She wasn't planning to steal from me alone. She was planning something much bigger. And when I heard the next sentence, I realized my son wasn't simply going to lose his wife. He might be standing directly in the path of the people she had brought into our lives. I stayed inside my truck with the engine off, listening to Brianna's voice through the recording. I found something bigger, she whispered. Much bigger than the money from Caleb's shop. I pressed my fingers against the steering wheel. Then I heard a man's voice through the phone. You said that before. Brianna immediately became defensive. This is different. How different? There's equipment in the North warehouse. A lot of it. Expensive equipment. I saw the paperwork myself. How much? She hesitated. Close to $500,000. The line went quiet. Then the man asked the question that made my blood run cold. And how do you plan on getting inside? Brianna answered without hesitation. I have the access code. I stopped breathing for a moment. She had found the code. Or at least she believed she had. The man on the phone told her she had 4 days to settle what she owed him. 4 days. Brianna promised she could do it. Then came the sentence that hurt me more than anything else. And Caleb? The man asked. What about your husband? Brianna didn't pause. He won't be involved. What does that mean? It means he won't know anything. I stared through the windshield at the dark Marina. My son wasn't even part of her plan anymore. He was an obstacle she intended to leave behind. I ended the recording and sat there for several minutes. I thought about Caleb at 7 years old, sitting beside his mother while she taught him how to tie fishing knots. I remembered him at 16, coming home soaked because he'd spent an entire afternoon helping an injured fisherman repair his boat. That was my boy. He trusted people because he had never learned to expect betrayal. And the woman sleeping beside him was preparing to destroy everything he had built. I couldn't let that happen. But I still had one problem. I needed Caleb to see the truth himself. Not from me. Not from a document. Not from an accusation. He needed to witness the moment his wife's lies collapsed. So I asked him to meet me the next evening. We parked across from the Marina. He looked confused. Dad, what's going on? I opened my laptop. I need you to watch something. The first recording played. Brianna talking about the warehouse. Caleb's face changed. Then came the second recording. The transfers from his business account. Then her conversation with the mysterious man. Caleb stopped the video. No. His voice was barely audible. She wouldn't do this. I didn't argue. I simply restarted the recording. When Brianna's voice came through the speakers again, Caleb looked down at his hands. He didn't defend her this time. He couldn't. His eyes filled with tears. I trusted her. I know. She was my wife. I know. He covered his face. And for several seconds, the only sound inside the truck was his breathing. Then he looked at me. What do we do? I pointed toward the warehouse. We wait. For what? The mistake she thinks she's getting away with. That night, I increased security around the north building. But I didn't tell Brianna. I wanted her confident. I wanted her to believe the door would open exactly as planned. The next 2 days passed quietly. Almost too quietly. Brianna acted normal around Caleb. She cooked dinner. She laughed at his jokes. She even kissed him goodbye before leaving for work. Watching her pretend to love my son made something inside me ache. Because Caleb had finally stopped believing her. But he still loved the woman he thought she was. On the fourth night, just before midnight, Ray called. Harold. His voice was different. They're here. I looked at Caleb. He was sitting beside me, staring at the security monitor. Then headlights appeared on the screen. One dark van. Then another vehicle. Brianna stepped out. But she wasn't alone. 3 men followed her. And 2 of them were carrying weapons. Caleb's hand grabbed my arm. Dad. I looked at him. Whatever happens next, don't look away. On the monitor, Brianna walked toward the warehouse. She pulled something from her pocket. The access code. She smiled. Then she entered the final numbers. The lock clicked. The door began to open. And at that exact moment, every light surrounding the warehouse suddenly came alive. Caleb gasped. A siren erupted through the Marina. And from the darkness behind them, armed officers appeared. Brianna's face went completely white. Because she had just walked into a trap she never knew existed. The warehouse exploded with light. Brianna froze halfway through the doorway. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then a voice thundered across the Marina. Federal agents. Drop your weapons and get on the ground. The 2 men beside Brianna immediately raised their hands. One dropped his rifle into the gravel. The other turned toward the fence. He made it 3 steps. Then 3 officers surrounded him. Brianna stood completely still, the bolt cutters hanging from her hand. She looked toward the security cameras, then toward the dark windows of the Marina. Finally, she whispered, No. Beside me, Caleb was shaking. I could feel his fingers gripping the edge of the seat. That's my wife, he said. I didn't answer. Because at that moment, I knew there was nothing I could say that would make this easier. The woman Caleb had loved was standing in the middle of a federal operation with armed men. And she had brought them there herself. An officer ordered her onto the ground. Brianna dropped the bolt cutters. I can explain. Face down. This is a misunderstanding. Hands behind your back. She fell to her knees. Then her eyes suddenly found the security camera. For a moment, she stared directly into it. And I knew she was looking at me. Her expression changed. The panic disappeared. Anger replaced it. You. Her voice echoed across the yard. You set me up. Caleb flinched. I didn't move. The officers pulled her hands behind her back and secured the restraints. She kept shouting. I didn't steal anything. I never touched anything. I was invited here. But the cameras had recorded everything. Her arrival. The men. The weapons. The bolt cutters. The access code. Every word she had spoken. There was nowhere left for her to hide. Caleb watched silently. Then he whispered. She knew. I looked at him. She knew what? She knew exactly what she was doing. His voice broke. She wasn't confused. No. She wasn't desperate and making a mistake. No. She planned this. I put my hand on his shoulder. Yes. He looked away. A tear rolled down his cheek. Then another. He wiped them quickly, almost embarrassed. I wanted to tell him it was okay. But sometimes a father can't make his son's pain disappear. All he can do is stay beside him while it happens. The officers searched the vehicles. Inside one van, they found equipment for cutting locks and removing property. In the second vehicle, they found containers, tools, and documents connecting the men to the person Brianna had spoken with on the phone. Her entire plan was unraveling in front of us. But then something happened that none of us expected. An officer approached Brianna with a sealed evidence bag. Inside was her phone. He asked, "Is this yours?" Brianna said nothing. The officer opened a folder. "We have messages here arranging tonight's entry." Her face collapsed. Caleb stared at the screen. He had heard her lies. Now he was seeing the proof. There was no argument left. No misunderstanding. No innocent explanation. Only the truth. On the drive home, Caleb didn't speak. He stared through the passenger window while the Marina disappeared behind us. Then suddenly he said, "Dad, I think I knew." I glanced at him. Knew what? That something was wrong. His voice trembled. I just didn't want to believe it. That sentence broke my heart. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't hurt most when you discover it. It hurts when you realize how many times your heart warned you, and you ignored it because you loved someone. 3 days later, we were sitting at my kitchen table when Caleb's phone rang. Unknown number. He looked at me. I nodded. He answered. A recorded voice announced a collect call from the detention center. Then Brianna came on the line. Her voice was trembling. "Caleb, please listen. You don't understand what happened." He closed his eyes. She began crying, begging, blaming everyone except herself. Then she said the words she thought would save her. "Please, I need you to believe me." Caleb opened his eyes, and for the first time since I had known my son, there was no hesitation in them. He lifted the phone closer. "I already believed you once." He paused. That's what nearly destroyed me. Then he waited, because he had one question left, and the answer would finally determine whether he walked away from her forever. "Caleb, please. You have to understand." Brianna's voice trembled through the phone. She sounded frightened, broken, almost innocent. But my son had already heard the recordings. He had already watched the security footage. And now he was listening to the same woman who had once promised to stand beside him for the rest of her life. Caleb stared at the table. "What do you want me to understand?" I was desperate. She started crying. "I made mistakes, Caleb. I was drowning. I didn't know what else to do." He closed his eyes. I could see the battle happening inside him. Part of him still wanted to rescue her. That was the hardest thing about loving someone who betrayed you. Your mind understands the truth long before your heart accepts it. Brianna continued. "Your father hates me. He set everything up. He wanted you to leave me." Caleb looked at me. For a moment, I said nothing. Then Brianna whispered, "Please don't let him destroy our marriage." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Our marriage?" "Yes. You stole from my business. I was going to pay it back. You brought armed men to my father's property. I didn't know they were going to hurt anyone. You told them you had the access code." Silence. Caleb's voice became quieter. "You told them I would never know it was you." Brianna stopped crying. That silence told him more than any confession could have. He looked down at the phone. "Where did you get the code?" She didn't answer. "Brianna." "Nothing." He waited. Finally, she said, "I found it." "How?" Another silence. Then Caleb understood. "You went through Dad's house." She started crying again. "I was looking for paperwork. You broke into his study. I was scared. You lied to me. I was trying to protect us." Caleb laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Protect us?" His voice cracked. "You were stealing from me. I was going to fix everything. You were going to disappear." Brianna didn't respond. Caleb looked at me. I could see tears in his eyes again. Then he said something I knew had taken everything he had left. "I heard you." Brianna went silent. "I watched you." Another pause. "You said I would never know it was you." Her breathing became uneven. "Caleb." "No." He shook his head. "You don't get to explain this anymore." She began begging again. "Please don't hang up." Caleb's fingers tightened around the phone. For several seconds, he simply listened to her cry. Then he said, "I loved the woman I thought you were." His voice broke. But she never existed. He ended the call. Then he placed the phone on the table. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Caleb leaned back and covered his face. I moved my chair closer. He whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not listening to you." I shook my head. "Son, you love someone. That's not something you apologize for." He lowered his hands. "But I ignored you. You were trying to save your marriage." He looked toward the photograph of his mother sitting on the counter. "I think Mom would hate seeing me like this." I smiled sadly. "She wouldn't." "How do you know?" "Because she would sit right beside you until you stopped hurting." That finally broke him. He stood and hugged me. Not the polite hug grown men give each other. The kind he used to give me when he was a child. The kind where he held on because he was afraid that if he let go, everything would fall apart again. I held him tightly. And for the first time in months, I felt like I had my son back. But there was still one thing I hadn't told him. The warehouse had never been the real treasure. The fake inventory had only been bait. The real thing I'd been protecting had nothing to do with marine equipment. 6 weeks earlier, I had quietly moved something far more valuable into a place Brianna could never reach. Something I had prepared years ago. Something his mother had helped me create before she died. I waited until Caleb pulled away. Then I reached into the drawer beside the table. I placed a small brass key in front of him. He stared at it. "What is this?" I smiled. "Your mother wanted you to have it someday." Caleb picked it up. And when I told him what that key opened, he looked at me as if he had just discovered that his entire life had been built around a secret. Because Brianna had spent years chasing a fortune she thought was hidden behind a locked door. She had no idea the inheritance she wanted had never been inside that warehouse. It had been waiting for Caleb all along. Caleb kept staring at the brass key. "What does it open?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked toward the photograph of his mother. There was a reason Margaret and I had kept this secret for so many years. Not because we didn't trust our son. Because we knew that one day, someone might try to take advantage of him. I finally said, "Your mother and I created something for you before she passed." Caleb frowned. "What kind of something?" "An inheritance." He almost laughed. "Dad, I don't understand." "You're not supposed to." "Not yet." I took the key from his hand and placed it beside the photograph. "Years ago, your mother and I realized that putting everything you own in one place isn't protection. It's an invitation." Caleb stared at me. "So the warehouse was never your inheritance?" His eyes widened. "Then what was inside?" "Nothing Brianna would have wanted." He looked confused. I smiled. The inventory she found was fake. Caleb sat back. "You mean she risked everything for something that didn't even exist?" "Yes." For the first time since the arrest, a faint smile appeared on his face. Then it disappeared. "But what does the key open?" I stood and walked toward an old cabinet that had belonged to his mother. I pulled out a folder. Inside was a trust agreement. Caleb's name was written across the front. He stared at it. "Dad, your mother and I established it several years ago." He slowly opened the folder. The documents explained everything. A separate investment account. Property interests. Savings accumulated over decades. Assets completely disconnected from the Marina business and our personal accounts. Nothing Brianna could access. Nothing she could discover by searching public property records. Nothing she could steal by taking control of Caleb's business. Caleb's eyes moved across the pages. "How much?" I shook my head. "That isn't the important part." "It is to me. The important part is that it belongs to you." He looked at me. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because your mother wanted you to build your own life first." I paused. "And because we wanted to know that whoever stood beside you loved you for you." Caleb lowered his eyes. That sentence hit him harder than anything else. He remembered every conversation Brianna had ever had about money. Every question about the Marina. Every suggestion that he sell his shop. Every time she'd asked about my property. He finally understood. She never wanted me. I sat beside him. She wanted what she thought came with you. He wiped his eyes. And she thought the warehouse had it. Yes. He gave a quiet, bitter laugh. She spent months chasing a fake fortune, while the real one was protected somewhere she never thought to look. Caleb leaned back and stared at the ceiling. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Dad, I'm not sure I even want the money." I looked at him. "Why?" "Because I don't want to become like her." I smiled. "That tells me you're nothing like her." He looked at the trust documents again. "This changes everything." "No," I said. "It doesn't." He looked confused. "The money doesn't change who you are. It only gives you more choices." He nodded slowly. Then he folded the documents and placed them back inside the folder. "I want to rebuild the shop first." I smiled. "That sounds like my son." Over the next few weeks, Caleb began putting his life back together. He changed the business accounts. He hired an accountant. He stopped letting other people control his finances. And slowly, the man I remembered began returning. He laughed again. He slept better. He started spending evenings at the Marina instead of staring at his phone waiting for Brianna to call. But one evening, while we were closing the shop, Caleb asked me something I hadn't expected. "Dad." "Yeah." "Why did you know she would come after the warehouse?" I stopped what I was doing. Because there was one final truth I hadn't told him. The warehouse had not been the only trap. There had been another secret hidden inside those documents. And Brianna had unknowingly left behind the one piece of evidence that could finally explain where all her stolen money had gone. I looked at my son. "You really want to know?" He nodded. I opened the office drawer and pulled out a document with one name printed across the top. Brianna's. Caleb's expression changed. because the next page revealed something neither of us had expected. She hadn't been working alone. The name on the document was not a stranger's. It belonged to someone Caleb had met more than once. Someone who had smiled at him, shaken his hand, and acted like a friend. Caleb stared at the page. Who is this? I slid the document across the table. Someone Brianna had been sending money to. His eyes moved down the page. Then his expression changed. The man wasn't the mastermind behind everything. He was the person helping Brianna move the stolen money. Small transfers, different accounts, fake invoices, all connected. Brianna hadn't simply been drowning in debt. She had built a system around hiding it. Caleb sat silently. Then he whispered, "How long?" "Almost a year." He looked away. For a moment, I thought he might break again. Instead, he took a deep breath. "Then it's over." And this time I believed him. The legal case continued for months. Brianna couldn't explain away the recordings, the financial records, the messages, or the footage from the warehouse. The men she brought with her faced serious charges. The person helping move the money was eventually questioned too. But I stopped following the details. Some battles end when you finally stop giving them space in your mind. Caleb filed for divorce. He rebuilt his business from the ground up. The money Brianna had taken was never going to be recovered completely, but Caleb refused to let that become the story of his life. He worked. He learned. He became more careful. But he never became bitter. That was the part that made me proud. One Sunday afternoon, he and I stood on the dock behind the Marina. The same place where I'd spent 40 years watching boats disappear over the horizon. Caleb looked at the water. "Dad." "Yeah. Mom would be proud of us." I smiled. "She would be proud of you." He shook his head. "No. Of us." I looked toward the sky. For the first time in years, the grief of losing Margaret didn't feel quite as heavy. I remembered the promise I'd made at her graveside. Protect our boy. I'd thought protecting him meant keeping danger away. I finally understood it meant something different. Sometimes you can't prevent someone from hurting the person you love. Sometimes the only thing you can do is stand beside them until they find the strength to walk away. I reached into my pocket and handed Caleb the brass key. "Keep it." He looked at it. "What does it open?" I smiled. "Something your mother left for you." He laughed softly. Then he hugged me. And as I held my son, I realized the greatest thing Brianna had unknowingly given us wasn't money. It was clarity. She had shown Caleb exactly who deserved a place in his life. She had reminded me why I'd spent decades protecting what mattered. And she had taught us both the lesson I wish we'd never needed to learn. Greed can make a person stare so hard at what they want that they stop seeing what they're destroying. Brianna thought my greatest treasure was hidden behind a locked warehouse door. She was wrong. The real treasure had been sitting beside me at that kitchen table. My son. The promise I'd made to his mother. And the family bond that survived even when someone tried to tear it apart. That evening, I sat alone on the dock as the sun disappeared behind the marina. I looked at Margaret's photograph resting beside me and whispered, "I kept my promise." The water moved quietly beneath the dock. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt at peace. Because some people spend their entire lives chasing money. Others spend their lives protecting the people money can never replace. And if I've learned anything after 67 years, it's this. You can hide money behind walls. You can hide documents in safes. You can hide the truth for years. But you can never hide someone's character forever. Eventually greed speaks. Eventually lies crack. And eventually, the people who were betrayed get to decide what their lives look like after the truth comes out. Caleb chose to rebuild. I chose to forgive myself for not seeing it sooner. And together, we chose to keep living. That was our real inheritance. Not the money. Not the property. Not the warehouse. Each other.